Right. We're going to try and get going here slowly to give a few other people time to get in from another panel. I'm going to do the housekeeping for us first. Do I have an iPad for questions? Yeah. If you have questions,
there's an iPad over here.
Oh, good. Thank you. Feel free to do the QR codes and send them up. This room is small and intimate enough that if you have questions, we can just take the questions from the audience. But if you're shy and want to send them up by iPad, we will be keeping an eye out for those as well. We are also not going to do busy introductions of our panelists. They're going to let you know a little bit about their background as we get going. But please take a look in your program book because they're really extraordinary people on this panel now. And one of them, any questions on questions or any of the getting to going? Okay. One of the panelists that was here for the summit last year was Megan Squire. And there are, as you could tell, a lot of really fabulous people at the summit, and there were last year. But there was just something about Megan's ability to explain really complicated issues that we thought was super special. I know I'm going to start off by embarrassing you. And so when we wanted to talk about a kind of complicated project like Follow the Money, this was one of the first calls that we made. So let me start off with what sounds like a softball question, but it's actually kind of a hard question, which is, who cares? Why follow the money? What does it tell us about the issues that we really need to know about to tackle this problem?
Yeah, so I'm Megan. Good to see everybody here. I follow the money because it hurts the bad guys, and it's one of the most effective ways that I can think of to take them down, to get justice for victims, and to stop them in their tracks from growing and metastasizing, turning into something worse. So that's why I do it.
Excellent. And can you give us a tiny bit of background, who you are and what you do and
why
you're doing it?
Oh, yeah. I'm a random person who likes to know. So I'm Deputy Director for Data Analytics and OSINT at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm trained as a computer scientist, data science, and cybersecurity background. And I was an academic at a university for about 20 years before I gave it all up to do this. So,
okay, Jim.
I'm Jim Marone. I'm an economist at RAND Corporation. Being involved sort of in the policy world, policy adjacent, for me, my work's always the question of, well, what are we going to do to solve this problem? So the problem of financing, the reason we should care about it is because these groups need money. They need money to recruit, to propagandize, to procure material, to host training sessions, et cetera. So if we study where they're getting their money and how, and also sort of break down some of the conventional wisdom, what we believe is true is not always the case, right? Or it may be not the most important source of funding, then we can work with other groups, like a lot of the groups here, to figure out how to address that.
Okay.
Yeah. My name's Michael Edison Hayden. I am a senior investigative reporter and spokesperson with Southern Poverty Law Center. Why follow the money? I just think in terms of reporting, there is a lot of really, really bad reporting on the far right. There's more bad than good, and by a large margin. And most of the reporting on the far right focuses on this kind of Tinker Toy, Lego stuff. What did this guy say? What did that guy say? Which does very little other than promote these people's brands and help them get more fame through infamy, because we live in a really corrupt society that advantages people who are bad. You don't have to look further than Donald Trump for that. So when we're talking about following the money, we are talking about attacking power structures. And that is the hard part. It's very easy to talk about who these players are on an individual level, what they say and do, and the antics that they pull off. But the more deeper reporting comes from how do they organize, and when you expose that, we also have a mission at Southern Poverty Law Center, it's not just to report. And by exposing the way they organize, you can weaken them. And when you expose who gives them the money, then you have a chance to put pressure on the people who make it all happen. and that's why it's important. It's not only, it's like I'm not very good at chess. It's like the queen on the chessboard of the reporting, and the pawns are like whatever Elijah Schaefer said.
When I went to law school, I remember many things you learn in law school, particularly the first year of law school, is the reasonable test, right? So the answer is always, it depends. What's the right answer? Well, it depends. What are the factors? And you weigh the factors and you come up with a reasonable answer. And I had math friends who went out of their minds, right? They were like, just tell me that again, right? I just need to know. And to me, to some way, the money is the math, right? There's a lot of anecdotes flying around. There's a lot of things that sound sexy and stuff flying around, but it's the math that proves whether they're right or wrong. And so it's a powerful truth teller too, I think, in many respects. A lot of this field of trying to identify the flows of money and what it tells us about who's actually doing what to who evolved when we were looking at the funding of ISIS and Islamic terrorism. And Jim, you've studied that a lot. Can you sort of take us back to how that field began and what you were seeing about the mechanisms of funding that were being used then and that we got good at knowing about?
Sure, yeah. And I think actually the director of the NCTC this morning also sort of talked about how our security infrastructure and our approach to counterterrorism since 9/11 really was focused on these Islamist groups, so ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And we learned things that we can apply to some of the more domestic groups now, but also things that don't apply. So when I started at RAND, I'd say ISIS was still very much a focus of our work. So my first project was examining some of their finances, but a lot of that work was also done by my colleagues, so I'm giving them credit here. What we knew about those groups was partly due to their structure, their size. These groups are very centralized, very organized, and they control territory. So that means they can get money in a lot of the ways that a government would. So they can tax locals, they can extort money, they can also seize money from banks in the territories that they basically take over. And they can trade weapons, they can trade drugs. So that gives them access to a lot of money. I mean, some of these groups have hundreds of millions of dollars, or some estimates of ISIS in 2014 said they might have access to $2 billion. So these are very well-funded groups relative to the domestic groups that we're mostly talking about at this conference. So that makes them very different. But I would definitely point out one big similarity, which is that all of these groups are very willing to be opportunistic and experimental. So, we did see ISIS dabbling in cryptocurrency maybe as early as 2014. Last week, the government raised a red flag that, there's an NFT from a sympathizer online, and it doesn't look like they actually sold it or made money from that yet. But that's, it's like they're dipping their toes in the water. And that's similar to what we see with some of the domestic groups. So there is sort of experimental, being ad hoc, sort of being opportunistic in ways that makes it important that we are creative in how we investigate and what kinds of data we use. And we have to keep up with those sorts of techniques that these groups are using.
Okay. Are we, I'll do this to Michael and Megan, completely contrary to ISIS being very centralized, what we're seeing now, particularly in the United States, are very decentralized groups. A, is that right? And B, is what kind of challenges does that present to you as researching money flows among individuals or groups that are not connected centrally?
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you'd probably agree. Definitely a trend towards decentralization, influencer culture, branding, and that kind of thing but in addition to, I guess, or maybe growing in importance to traditional, membership-based groups. The challenge there with the money is you've got a lot more entry points for people to give donations, for campaigns to spring up, for just people to track. So it's just a lot more data points to keep track of. There's also a lot more platforms where all of this is going on. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but the whole landscape just to me feels a lot more diffuse. So very challenging.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that there are just so many different ways that they're obtaining money. And beyond just how many people that are we have to cover. But we recently did a report for the January 6th committee And I was really struck by the end of it, because so much of it was our own reporting. It's just how many different methods they actually have to raise money. Whereas perhaps if this was done in the 90s or something like that, it would be very, very different. And that's one of the things that the internet has created.
Yeah, and we're going to talk. Megan has a really nice slide to help us sort of outline some of those issues. But before we do that, Jim, you raised such an interesting point on our prep call about because ISIS sort of ran government services, it actually paid people as opposed to raising. Can you just share that point? I thought it was so interesting for.
Right. So what we hear in the news and from your work is some of the groups in the U.S. Are getting either membership fees or donations, and Islamist groups certainly get donations, small donations, although that's illegal in most cases. You can prosecute those people, but these groups sort of flip it and in some cases will pay their members essentially to be fighters. So they're paying them a salary as one way to recruit, which we're not seeing in the U.S.
Yeah, and the reason that was so interesting, I think, to all of us when it came up is that we've spent a decade or more looking at a model where they pay people to do their bidding, and now it's quite the reverse, where they're raising money from members who fund their activities from a very decentralized platform. So a complete flip of what we've gotten good at over the years. So Megan, can you kind of take us through just sort of a diversity of fundraising methods?
Do we have a slide, or do I just hit the? Oh, it should be. There we go. Yeah. So so this is a model I came up with. I know I'm a computer nerd. We make models. So anyway, this is more of a diagram. But from left to right, we've got 4 different funding mechanisms. These are the ways that I spend most of my time in tracking. These are the things that I track the most. So donations coming in, including cryptocurrency, merchandising and dues. So asking people to become a member and pay, or purchase an outfit, buy your clan robe, whatever. Crowdfunding, so coming up with a one-time campaign and then getting people to pay into that. And then a newer model, which I shorthanded as super chats, but this would be donations that come in during live video streaming. And I know that sounds really niche. Turns out it's super popular, and there's a lot going on there. At the bottom, I've got some characteristics of each of these methods, and from left to right, donations can be a bit more removed. They can be delayed. It might happen randomly in the middle of the night, weeks after maybe you met someone, you might send them a donation. Super chats happen immediately in real time. Donations, it can be difficult to shake people down for this kind of money. Super chats and crowdfunding, this is very easy. You mash a button on a website, the money flows into the person's online account. Donations, merch, and dues, these things can be a little bit more separated. You don't feel as close or intimate with the person you're donating to. You might just throw them a Bitcoin, right? But you might not get a thank you note back. In the case of super chats and crowdfunding, these relationships tend to be a lot more intimate. So it's very tied to some of the more popular social media channels like YouTube and Instagram, things like that. Donations could happen in smaller numbers. Things like crowdfunding and super chats happen in the tens of thousands, maybe even more donations per instance. So there's just a lot of differences in each method that they use to fund, and how we have to study that because of the size of the data, the velocity and the volume of that data.
So can I ask you a quick question for the non-technical?
Yeah.
Explain what super chats are, how they work, and maybe give an example in this
Happy
space.
to do that really quickly. So in video live streaming, you typically have a person doing a broadcast of something. They might be out on the town. They might be behind a green screen at a desk trying to look like a newscaster. And depending on the social media platform that they're streaming on, they are allowed to ask their viewers for donations. And sometimes those donations come in the form of a site currency, or it could just be money, regular money. Typically, those are attached to some kind of comment that the user gets to make. So, hey man, love your show. Can you give a shout out to my girlfriend or whatever? And then they attach a bit of money to that to float that donation to the top and get the attention of the streamer. So this is a very intimate relationship. You're actually communicating with the newscaster, right, that you're watching. These groups have taken that model and really exploited it to monetize propaganda. So their incendiary rhetoric is now directly tied to immediate real-time fundraising. the nastier you are, you turn that volume up on the amount of money that comes in. So.
Michael, you've talked and written about the crowdfunding issues and the idea that different online forums, the more you click, the more money you make. And the more you say horrible things, the more clicks you get, the more money you make. Can you talk about that phenomenon, if you see that as a growing issue?
Well, sure. I mean, I think a really good example of this is Tim Pool, who is not really he's kind of a borderline figure for us. I'd categorize him as sort of hard right, but he's mostly just an internet performer. And we did a partnership with ISD, a story that I published a few months back, where Pool is kind of just pushing people on this civil war issue. Everything is about civil war, impending civil war, and we know exactly what he's talking about there. He's trying to get his extremely online, locked in, fans to be thinking in terms of carrying out some kind of civil war, at least cosplaying it or whatever else. And his super chats in the run-up to January 6th begin to start to show more and more threats of what actually happened on January 6th. And YouTube, of course, is profiting from this, making little money every time people, are paying money to get their comment up there that is, essentially a threat towards insurrection. And then afterwards, he does another live stream, and the people are paying money to get their comment up there that says, something along the lines of, oh, it was so great, they were cowering in their beds and et cetera, whatever else. And this is this is a little bit different than something that is completely ideologically driven. This is the tech companies enabling essentially political violence and insanity, just to make a little bit of a buck off of it. And that's what Pool is just a performer in that field. There's so many of these social media influencers who are on the far right where I don't even actually care what they believe. I don't know what they really believe, and I don't care. It's more about what they do and how they make their money and how it steers the world in a much more violent and dangerous direction.
You mentioned the report that you and Megan did on January 6th and the funding that led up to the preparation of January 6th. And when in reading the testimony, one of the things that was so eye-opening for me is, particular line items for, protective gear and so forth. Can you describe what some of your research showed about the funding and the pre-funding of that event?
Pre-funding of, one more time?
January 6th.
Of January 6th. So many different groups and individuals who are involved in, I think Megan's got a
couple
thing here. So many of the groups and individuals who are involved in January 6th, and they didn't have to be in the Capitol that day, but promoted the Stop the Steal campaign, got huge influx of fundraising in different ways in the run-up to that event. And it's so important to think in terms of events because January 6th, it's not like you can have an insurrection like on any given Thursday at at Citi Field or something like that. You need an event, and the event was Trump, standing there with the hopes of overturning the results of the election. That's what was the galvanizing event. So in the run-up to that, you had things like, as Megan and I reported, the InfoWars store just repeatedly. All of a sudden, Alex Jones is doing tremendous amount of traffic in his InfoWars store, going back to numbers he had not seen since 2017. You had individuals like who were some of the ones, Megan?
Give, Send, Go. There were tons of campaigns that people
put
out.
1.5 million.
Yeah, crowdfunding campaigns asking for give us money to buy protective gear and all this kind of thing in the run up to this. I mean, it was, and that's not the only one. There were tons of other ones that were legal, bail me out legally and all this kind of thing. Yeah, it was just millions of dollars.
So the event, Trump's event, his announced event, becomes, a fundraising bonanza, merchandising bonanza for all these different actors that they can just hook into it and go. And we've seen that in small ways all through. Does anybody, any of the real heads remember the Antifa Civil War of November 4th, 2017? when Antifa took over the country and destroyed all these white businesses. No, that did not happen. But it was a small protest that InfoWars turned into a hype machine and generated massive amounts of traffic. And there were tons of people, tons of far-right actors, like just generating traffic off of this fake event. And these events are so crucial for people to raise money.
So do you want to do this one and then go back to the prior slide?
You know what? I'm going to flip back and forth. I'm going to make their heads spin.
Go. Only we know what order they were originally in.
Yeah, I mean, Mike talked about this one a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I can go back to the previous one and start there. But Proud Boys were another group that was really active. We're probably up to here hearing about them and their activities, their antics on January 6th. But this was an earlier network diagram that I did trying to understand the structure of that group. And I decided to look at the money to reveal the hierarchy, right? Who's in charge? Who's taking the bucks here? What's going on? And I used Venmo, a payment platform that has its data publicly exposed, at least it did at the time. I think they've locked it down since some rather famous people's Venmo accounts were discovered. But anyway, it used to be public by default, and so you could see all the transactions changing hands. So this is a little model that I built. Each circle here is a person. The larger the circle, that means the more donations or the more transactions they're engaging in. And the red items there are the people that my model thought might be the leaders of the group based on their taking dues, taking transactions for whatever it was. Long story short, we were able, just from doing this simple diagram, able to figure out who the leaders of that group were. 6 of the 8 red circles there did turn out to be elders, they call them in Proud Boys. That was unknown at the time. Who was paying whom, and so this little chart has made the round. I think I've given this out to a lot of people to take action on some of these different groups that were growing at this time, and then later, of course, turned into the force we saw on January 6th. So.
And I think I love this slide because it relates to the question we were talking about earlier, which is why follow the money? What does it tell you? Yeah. One of the challenges in this field is this leaderless group, right? These connected online leaderless groups. But I think the work of Megan and the Southern Poverty Law Center is showing by just following the money, who gets the money? Who ends up with the money? Is that the leader, or is that somebody who is worthy of further information? And when we're talking about the amount of money, Michael, you mentioned for January, it was millions, right?
Yeah.
What other? Oh, I'm going way to the end of your slides. There are other.
We'll do it. We'll make it work.
There are other. I just found the numbers really surprising. Can you guys talk about some of the magnitude of some of the other numbers that you've seen?
Does it have to be January 6th?
It does not have to be January 6th.
Well, how about
30 million? How about 8 million?
Let's do Alex.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So.
Get his silly face.
So yeah. So Jones, if you are unfamiliar with his current position in society, is not doing particularly great. He has faced this Sandy Hook lawsuit and is really scrambling to keep his life together in many ways. And his finances have become tenuous, even if he has a lot of, we do think he has a lot of money, but the fear of losing it is considerable. And during as this became apparent to his fans, he made a plea on his show, or whoever can give me Bitcoin, please, for the love of God, the demons are after me. And somebody I believe it was February?
It was April.
It was April. No. No, it was maybe it was March. It was the beginning of March. Someone gives him $1 million in Bitcoin one day, and Megan comes to me and is like, "Oh my God, somebody gave $1 million in Bitcoin." I said, "Well, we have to get a story up." So we did that, and then as we published the story and it started to get some traction online, whoever this person was on the other end of it decided to wanted to double down and show that they're like, if SPLC is mad, I'm going to make them even more mad, and gave another $1 million in Bitcoin. So this is a person with a large amount of money on their hands. And then we get to this 8 million total in about, what was about
Like 2 weeks later. the
2
guy
or 3
just-
weeks
yeah.
later, just slowly giving him 8 million. And then cryptocurrency took a nosedive slowly after that. I'm not sure if Jones converted it to cash in
Cash
time to lose a majority of that or not, but he had removed it. And one of the things that is really telling is he had this wallet. We were aware of the wallet to track. Megan was tracking his wallet because it was publicly available on his website. And once he got someone gave him a big donation, he quickly removed the wallet. So it's a real sense that, one, the guy with all this money doesn't want to be known, and then Jones himself knows it's shady. So that's it, bottom text. I don't know anything
I
else.
was going to show the map, and it actually ties into some of the ideas that we learned about how to trace this stuff during the ISIS years and the Islamist terrorist years. But this was the map that I was building of another donor to Alex, who was donating to him as part of what's called a peel chain, where they peel off tiny amounts of money from a much larger cryptocurrency wallet. And every, I don't know, a couple weeks or so, every few days, they would take one of the peels, one of the tiny pieces that they normally would send to an exchange to cash it out. And instead of cashing it out at an exchange, they would just flip it over to Alex. And so I was watching that happen for months and months, wondering who the donor was, and just kind of just trying to build out a profile of them, thinking about when did they do it, what were they thinking about, what was Alex talking about that day that might have made them donate. And I was just kind of watching this unfold. And that morning, drinking my coffee, I watched the $1 million donation come in, and I called Mike and I never call him. So he knew something was up, and I said, "Hey, bud, we have a problem." But a lot of these techniques that we use to trace the crypto as it's flowing come from our prior work that folks did tracking the international terror milieu. And also, unfortunately, some of the obfuscation tactics, or the ways these guys hide their money, also come from that milieu. They kind of learned from prior, people who've been through it before. They learned some of the techniques. So how to launder the money, which is what was happening here. How to use different techniques within the crypto ecosystem to confuse us as we're trying to watch what's happening. So that happens fairly frequently. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, certainly laundering money, basically trying to cover your tracks is
Can you, in 30 seconds, explain laundering money? Just in 30 seconds.
Have you seen Breaking
you
Bad?
you take money that's obtained illegally for any reason, doesn't have to be for terrorist reason, and then you make it look legal by investing it in something where your name's not on it, and it appears now to be clean. So, a classic example would be like, I've stolen or expropriated funds, and now I've invested it in real estate, and I own that property. The equity there is mine. The underlying source of the funds wasn't tracked, so I've washed it. I've laundered it. You could do this with shell companies. You could do this with not-for-profits that aren't really not-for-profits. So, I say that I donate here, and this isn't really laundering, I guess, but it is sort of hiding your tracks.
Yeah.
That donate here to help Syrian refugees. Well, actually, I'm using that money to recruit fighters, and white supremacists do this too.
Yeah.
They also use these things like BitMixer or whatever,
mixing
these things where you
service,
essentially just combine cryptocurrencies into a sort of a pool and then re-withdraw your money. So it makes it difficult to find out where the actual numbers are. And then this, is it BitPay?
Yeah,
There's
BitPay.
where they just auto-generate new wallets through every transaction. So it's just making it complicated for us to figure it out. So it's like sort of like auto-generated. And Nick Fuentes uses this, if anybody's familiar with him and his work. Mike Penovich uses this, and as does certain parts of Hamas, I think, right? Or something like that.
Al-Qassam Brigade,
I think we reported.
it was where they got the idea, yeah.
Yeah, so this is just a way to obfuscate which wallet you're using.
One of the things I think that's particularly interesting about this part of the discussion is how sophisticated and rapidly moving these extremist groups are. Often they are sort of pictured to be, guys that live out in the backwoods and eat alligator and whatnot, right? They're not. They're very sophisticated financially. They are very sophisticated technologically, and they are ever evolving. And it's a field that really requires attention by very sophisticated people. I could tell you what I know about crypto on this little finger, but these continually evolving methods are something that we need sophisticated people to be able to track. I'll ask you a question out of order that I told you I was going to ask you before, which is there are very few people who are doing this particular work that you guys are doing. Why is that, and how do we fix that?
Well,
It's pretty complicated, is the first thing. In the case, I think it's like in Megan's case, she's like extremely brilliant and whatever. And in my case, I was willing to gamble on crypto and learned it that way. Right.
Self-interest is a wonderful.
No, just because just out of cultural curiosity on various bullshit that was happening in the world. So I was just interested what all the dude bros were into.
One of the other interesting stories was the French the suicide
Yes.
guy. So just in terms of the power of this field to open your eyes to what was going on that was otherwise invisible. Who wants to tell that story? Mike, do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, his name is Bachelier, I believe is the way it's pronounced, and he was a French computer programmer, and he gave a significant amount of money to white supremacists, American white supremacist groups. And one thing that is of note about the people he chose to give money to, he gave money to Andrew Anglin of the Daily Stormer. He gave money to Nick Fuentes. He gave the bulk of the money to Nick Fuentes. I believe it's something like 13.5 Bitcoin.
13.8, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And then he also gave money to Peter Brimlow's VDARE. VDARE is also interesting for other reasons, not just because Peter Brimlow seems like Dracula, but the interesting thing about it is he chose white supremacists who are extraordinarily pro-Trump, and he did it at a time that preceded the attack on the Capitol by exactly 1 month, I believe. Maybe not exactly, but December 8th and January 6th, right? So right in that run-up, again, where that commotion, where the event is, where the noise is, he does this, and then I believe he had health complications and took his own life immediately after doing that. So there are people who have stashed a lot of cryptocurrency who have the ability to fund groups. It's not only the type of very wealthy boogeyman type figures that we think of in the United States as being reactionary funders, people like Peter Thiel or that type of thing. It can also be a person you would not expect who has just a store of maybe they have a ton of Cardano that they bought at like a very small amount and they're very rich or something like that. They're very, very difficult to tell who has it for that reason.
You mentioned VDARE. Do you want to talk a little bit more about VDARE and what you've seen there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of any of the things that we cover here. Anything makes me more sick than the fact that VDARE is like a nonprofit. They have nonprofit status. They are a white supremacist group. They have published apologia about the El Paso shooters manifesto. They deal with all kinds of dehumanizing language about black people, and they have bought without any need for a loan a castle in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. That really adds to the the vibe of Peter Brimlow seeming like Dracula, and it really should be a historical building for everyone. It has roots that go back to the very beginnings of the United States. This building, it's for the people, and I mean he's getting dark money in the from groups like Donors Trust. They're bundling money from figures like the Mercers and whoever else. Alex Koch partnered with me on that story. If you don't know Alex Koch, he's a superb journalist. I'm happy to give him a shout out here. But yeah, I mean, they got like $4.5 million in 2019 for VDARE, and that's a lot of money for people who traffic in insinuating that non-white people are predisposed to be less intelligent or less capable than white men. That's bad, and it's being done in a very normal way, in a way that any normal nonprofit would do. So,
in terms of actions that can be taken, government actions that can be taken that can help stem the tide, one of the things that was done for ISIS and Islamic groups was the creation of identified lists. Can you explain that process and how it went down with respect to the financing of those? And then I'm going to ask you guys to speak to whether there's any applicability of that.
Yeah, so using designated lists, or whatever different countries call it, listing a group as a terrorist organization, essentially, it makes it illegal to work with them, to donate to them. And so what you see, every year there's a few dozen cases in the US and Europe, Canada, where people have sent money to, say, ISIS, and so they're arrested and tried. And we don't generally do that here in the US, at least for domestic groups, and so that makes it legal to send these groups money. So same source of financing, but one can be done pretty openly. It's possible for foreign countries to list our groups, and that is one route by which we can help shut these groups down. But I'll let Megan and Michael speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do a picture here of one of the frustrations here. So we don't typically see governments taking action on the fundraising of the groups and individuals that we track. This is a case that, long story short, we have to a lot of times rely on the tech companies to take action. So what you see here is a video live streamer. He goes by Baked Alaska. He's inside the Capitol right now on January 6th in this screenshot. He's using a kind of bottom tier video gaming platform that's designed to allow viewers of video gamers to donate to those people. They've taken this platform over basically and are now just using it to propagandize for extremist causes. This guy's earning money. You can see there someone gifted him the site currency. Slim Reaper decided to, thanks Baked Alaska for storming the Capitol. And this was going on, on the day. So when, we're watching this screenshotting this on the day. The platform did not take action until, 3 days after January 6th. But these guys have been using the platform to build a network, which I tracked for about 10 months. Shared the data, with SPLC colleagues. Mike wrote a great story, putting them kind of on blast and on notice. But the platform did nothing until that January 6th event. You can see here, I had this up a minute ago because we were talking about Nick Fuentes, who's the guy there shown on the top, but he was the top earner on this allegedly video game streaming platform, and he was earning...
Owen Benjamin.
He was the second, yeah.
So it was Owen Benjamin, then? I don't know, I'm sorry.
Patrick Casey. They were, all three of them terrible human beings, and they were the top earners on this platform for this entire 10-month period until they finally were removed after they literally attacked the Capitol. Like, this was a lot of time to be growing their network and taking donations, sometimes in the thousands of dollars per day, over $10,000 a month for this particular guy, and $116,000 in 10 months. So I don't know about
just
you,
a
but
quick
that's
ad
pretty
about
sweet money.
just a quick ad about DLive that
Yeah.
you really have to lower yourself to actually look at this website. It's like it is rock stupid. It's one of the dumbest looking things you've ever seen.
In the back.
And it has like these it's totally gamified where you give like little where you give tokens in the form of lemons and ice cream and cars. And who does this appeal to? It appeals to, I would argue, not the brightest kids, but kids. It is, and the fact that these people say ostensibly, oh, this is just for gaming and live streaming, but then you have the same platform that they're using, and they know very well that they have white supremacists using this gamified platform for children. Yeah, that's extremely bleak, and that's.
But that's the landscape we find ourselves in, is having to kind of play whack-a-mole and go onto all these crazy new platforms that we've never, how are they making money here? Anticipating when they're going to do that, and then trying to convince the tech companies to take any kind of action. So it's not a government thing. There are no well, there are lists. Some of the tech companies keep lists, but we don't know about them until they're leaked. So it's a challenging landscape.
Well, you'll hear, and I'll get to Bjorn in just a second. One of the things you'll hear discussed in some of the other panels, and we did last year, is are there reasons that we should identify lists of domestic terrorists? Are there ways to define them? Are there reasons or ways to list them? This is one of the reasons people talk about. It was an effective way to stop the financing of some of these hate groups. Is it something that we need to do, should do? Is it consistent with the First Amendment? There are a lot of questions involved in all of that, but there's an important financing, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add, there's a couple of other things that differ between the landscape that we work in and some of this more list-based stuff. The tech companies, and a lot of times, are acting almost like banks, right? Like they're letting money change hands. The people are earning on the platform, but there's no reporting requirements at all. Like, hey, some white supremacist is earning $10,000 a month on your platform, and there's no forms you have to fill out or anybody you have to notify about that. He's just, going to cash out, and then hopefully the IRS will read our article about it, and I don't know. It's very loose, right? But the banking side is a lot more, I guess, refined over time. So maybe there's some actions we can take with that. I don't know.
Yeah. So there's money laundering. Do you ever try to deposit $10,000 at a time? And right, you got to fill out every form. $9,999. You're good. They're money laundering controls, right? And they exist in the conventional banking system, but some of these other systems don't have them for a variety of reasons. Mike, can I just back up for 1 second? I know we only have a few minutes, and Bjorn, we'll take your question right after that. Can you just give a little bit more detail for the people who are not familiar with how these gaming sites actually work? Like, give us an example of what the guy's saying, how the memes work. Because I think it's really interesting in light of the number of times we see gamers identified as having the other attributes that are concerning for violent extremism.
So, I mean, 99.9% of all gaming content that is like what we got on Twitch and things like that, where people are watching people game, does not have any kind of relationship to extremism. I wouldn't call it exactly, intelligent entertainment, but that's my personal opinion. It is what it is. The things that we're talking about here are these guys going on with their live streams, like the Tim Pool live stream, for example, and or like Baked Alaska in the Capitol, where he's like, "Yeah, keep those donations going in. We're in the Capitol, man. Keep them coming." And it's like they're basically, people are there to push buttons in reward for the behavior that they're seeing on the screen. That's basically it. So you have a person like Baked Alaska, who is what I would describe as a buffoon and an internet performer, a racist internet performer, who, I think he got banned from a Starbucks. This is about as low as it gets. He got banned from a Starbucks for playing a racist song. But he goes, he's playing things, right, with racial slurs in it. And why is he doing that in a Starbucks? He's doing that because he's using this gamified platform, and his fans are there waiting for him to do something stupid and outrageous. And there are black people in the Starbucks, and they're like, "I'm sorry, what is going on here?" Like, obviously, like, how are you supposed to react? And basically he's risking someone punch him in the face. He's risking someone go up to him and like follow him to his car or whatever else, and they're rewarding him by like hitting them with those buttons that give him little tokens that are worth whatever it is, and that's how he earns his money. And it's
Weird.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tech industry issue. These people are all, this is a baseball word, but replacement level. You can just throw Baked Alaska out and get another narcissist in there. They have no discernible talent or credentials. They add no value to society whatsoever. You can find another one anywhere in any class clown who's willing to be racist can do this. But the tech companies themselves are the people who are creating this, and that's why it's so important to focus the attention on power structures and who is really behind this stuff.
Yeah, and I think part of the phenomenon is also the class clown phenomenon, to use your terminology, right? With social media, every class clown has a megaphone, right? And it's all out there, and what we're trained to do online is to push a like, and that's what we do, and that's what you do on this too, and it's not real money, it's not real people, it's just a game, just press yes. And I think it's a driver and an issue that we have to address. Bjorn?
First of all, big fan of your works, and we should compare notes on progress particularly. wondering about is there are service providers who are underpinning the payment.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
In these apps such as Stripe, PayPal. I know
Sure.
PayPal was founded by Teal, so that's probably out of the window already. But they have fraud detection teams working within them. Is there any overlap when you are working there where same goes for MasterCard, Visa, Amex, etc.? Is it possible to engage with those who are providing the infrastructure for payments within the formal economy in more meaningful and better ways? Maybe establish something similar to what GIFCT is doing for the tech sector, for the banking sector. I don't know.
That would be awesome. They've never called me. But my phone is ready, my email is there, my Twitter is open. Yeah, I would love it if we had a little bit more back and forth with a lot of these enablers at all levels, not just the financial enablers, but the domain registrars, the web hosting companies, the social media companies, the people inventing these cool new live streaming, all of that needs to think first, how is this going to be exploited? What am I going to do about that? If I'm not able in my small, cool tech company to know who these actors are, who can I call? Who can they call that will tell me how this is going to be exploited and who the folks are that are already exploiting these platforms? I'm happy to do that, and I wish they would call me.
If I could add to that, deplatforming is definitely effective, but in this country, it happens basically out of the, I guess you could say, goodwill of the company, like, for lack of a better word, because public opinion has exposed that they're hosting this activity. So after Charlottesville in 2017, there was a lot of deplatforming. There was no legal reason these companies needed to do it. And I think that's still the primary reason deplatforming happens, both on social media and in the financials. And so, I think that's one really good use of your guys' work is shedding light on this so that these companies are sort of shamed into doing it. But there really is no legal framework to force them to. And so, the court of public opinion is the main court we have, I guess.
I'm at the same level as you all. I see something bad happening and I turn in a trouble ticket or hit the little support button or the flag or anything else. There's no bat line. Usually. Some of the companies occasionally will offer one, but then the person leaves and it's just messier than you'd think. There's really no clean system, like you might think there is.
So we have 3 minutes. I'm going to come back to our panelists to ask about deliverables in a moment. But one that I'm going to put down on my list is that one for the following reason. We do a ton of work in human trafficking around the world. Same issues exist in human trafficking. How do you make sure that these payment systems and that others and banks and so forth don't inadvertently facilitate transactions that are facilitating child sex trafficking or similar issues? There are a number of different organizations, government and nonprofit and otherwise, that have coalesced those forces already around human trafficking. And I think there are very real possibilities to bring those same people around some of these issues for this financing, which is really interesting. So that's already on my list as a deliverable. Oh, look at this audience.
Hands
now.
going up.
Let's do Louisa. Can you explain who you are to the audience before you ask this question?
Domestic terrorist groups would be problematic? I mean, is this because you simply don't have enough evidence about their kind of terrorist group status, or is this some other kind of constitutional or legal reason?
This goes a little outside my expertise because
you're from Rand. You know everything.
That's why I call my lawyer friends to explain it. Because we have them. But yeah, I mean, it runs up against the question of First Amendment rights, and it also runs up against some legal, technical things about our laws that I'm not going to be able to unpack. So I'm going to have to refer you to some testimony that I could pull up for you, people who have explained it better. So there's both a legal and sort of a constitutional argument, but it is really a U.S. thing, yeah.
Questions? Yes?
I just do it without the mic. I'm loud and fresh. So one thing, it's been really cool to hear you talking about the money. What about going after the advertisers? Because all of these platforms are only online because of advertiser dollars. And actually, brands are a lot easier to say, if you don't do this, we're going to tell everybody you're going to write a fantastic story, and then that brand loses customers. So isn't that one way to sort of kill it quite quickly?
If we had more time, I think that would probably be included in this.
Yeah.
But I would say that, that type of activism, and it's not always reporting, but sometimes activism, online activism, is actually some of the better online activism that gets done. I don't know if anybody saw the kind of like strip and dip that happened with Post Millennial, which is like a kind of a degraded junk news website that Andy No is nominally involved in. And, there was a real push to kind of, get them to, hold account for all the junk and disinfo that they publish. And, they lost a lot of their advertisers, and it really struggled to keep going. I think the way I would differentiate that from what we're generally talking about here, though, is that we are talking about major influencers and groups and things like that, and who, what keeps them, afloat in a shadowy manner. The advertising stuff is on its face, but absolutely going directly over the advertisers who are in plain sight is extremely important and a big part of it. We're talking about, but some of these folks, it's like, who is the Bitcoin fairy, right?
Right.
Who are the people behind those donors trust donations, the dark money donations that are going to VDR? That is like a little bit what more I'm saying with follow the money, where the money is obscured. But advertising is like, I think it's a direct impact thing, and it's best for activists who are relentless.
It's also just super quick worth pointing out that a lot of the guys we've talked about, or groups that we've talked about here, have already lost advertising. This is money that's coming in after advertisers have already kicked them away, right? Yeah. So there's levels. It's like a downward escalator.
Tucker, like, what is it? It's like 9 blocks of My Pillow, right? It's just like, it's like My Pillow, my socks, my bedspread. Like, that's the whole thing now.
And I'll do one other shout out really quickly on the advertising point. There's another panel on advertising. And as you probably expect, advertisers have deals with platform companies because they don't want their ads running next to a plane crash, a beheading, or a bunch of things. So over time, algorithms have been developed by the companies for a financial reason to make sure that certain advertising does not appear next to certain content. The suggestion of this panel is if the advertisers were more specific and expanded the category of content that they do not want to appear next to, an algorithm would somehow come into being that would help find that content better. And could the advertising industry and people through their advertising companies push that envelope? So there's another panel for you, but it's a great point. That's all right. That's all right. I'm sorry. You were just planting that for yourself.
I have to bring the cynical thing there is if they after they expand it, will they actually follow it?
Yeah,
that is the question, because that's a social media thing all the time. They have all kinds of terms of service that they don't follow at all. Right? Look at Twitter.
All right. Well, with that, please join me in welcoming this, and be sure to go see the advertising panel, okay? Thank you so much, everybody.